I'll reset. Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Conversation with Nick Hay. It's a pleasure to welcome you, Nick. You are now, for the past few months now, CEO of GIST Limited, and we are really delighted to have you today. Did you want to tell us a little bit about your career history? I know that you've been in several companies, so take it away.
Yeah, so I studied engineering at university, and one of the things I learned studying engineering was I didn't enjoy engineering. So when I graduated, I looked for general management roles, didn't have anything specific in mind, and fell into logistics through Excel Logistics, which is now part of DHL. So I was a graduate trainee for them, fell into it, and I've loved it. Really enjoyed it my whole career. I've worked for a variety of organisations. So I've worked for 3PLs, I've worked for food manufacturers, and now effectively work for a retailer as GIST is owned by Marks and Spencer's. I've done a variety of things, from operational roles to strategic roles to commercial roles, and that variety, the variety of people, is what I love and what I've enjoyed. So you can be. If I think about some of the range of things that I've done, even in the last 6 months, from seeing a night shift and learning how we pick in this business, through to attending things at the House of Commons to try and lobby on behalf of the industry. It's a huge variety and it's great fun.
Have you always been in food logistics?
Almost entirely, yes, which was not by design. So I've worked for food manufacturers. I've worked in the chilled supply chain and the frozen supply chain most of my career, so almost entirely in food. In between Fowler Welch, which was a business that I ran for 10 years, and joining GIST, I had 3 years where I worked for a variety of businesses, none of which were, that's not true, several of which were not logistics businesses. So one was an apple growing business based in Kent, one was a tea business based in London that sells really nice teas around the world. So always pretty much in food, not always purely logistics.
You're going to have to give me the name of that tea business.
It's
give a shout out, please.
Jing Tea, J-I.
All right, we'll have to give it a go.
Yeah, Red Dragon's my personal favourite.
I'll make a note. So in terms of your career, when you started out, what do you think was a single role where you felt you learned the most and it was just a pivotal moment for you?
So I think I'll answer that question in a second. What I would say, and what I'd advise anybody in logistics or any business to do or career, is to choose your bosses carefully. Now, you can't always choose your boss. So it could be a trite thing to say. But what I do know is when I've grown, it's when I've had brilliant bosses. And I've been really lucky. My first boss was a chap called Mark Starosolski, who now leads the logistics for HS2. He was fantastic, and he was one of several bosses who have pushed me, supported me, allowed me the space to fail sometimes. And so I think that's a really important thing for people to think about. Is the person you're going to work for going to help you grow, allow you to make mistakes, empower you? And that would be my one really key piece of advice I'd give people. In terms of the part of my career where I probably learned the most, I mean, there's been many, but I was part of a management buyout when I was, how old was I? Around 30. And that management buyout went wrong, which was very painful. It was a very challenging period, but I learned a huge amount about actually running a business when that started going wrong, as opposed to just being a logistician. So that was a very, very rapid learning curve. So learning about cash flow and managing banks and shareholders, etc. So that was a very rapid learning curve for sure.
Yeah, I
But
can imagine.
yeah, but good fun. Didn't feel like it always at the time, but it was good fun. I think the other time when I probably grew a lot was when I've done site startups. So both as leading teams doing site startups, but also being part of a team earlier in my career. You realise the breadth of the things you need to consider when you're operating a business. So, everything from health and safety to how do you make sure the basics are there for people's welfare. So have they got the ability to get a drink and something to eat and use the bathroom and parking? And it makes you really realise all the little bits that go into making an operation work, and they're all important. If you take one out, it fails. And that's there's one story from my career when I was probably it's my first full-time job after being a graduate trainee, and we were doing a startup, and there were a couple of people who had real knowledge of the startup that we were doing, and everybody else was new. And because they had lots of knowledge, I neglected them because I thought they know what they're doing. I'm just going to leave them to it, and I'm going to go and focus on getting all this other stuff. And they pushed back against the fact that I wasn't giving them the same airtime as everybody else. And that made me realize very early on in my career that actually you have to make sure you have a touch point with everybody in your team, because those who you think are fine with everything and are really in control also are important, and they need to know that you're there and that you care and that you're interested, and you shouldn't take anybody for granted. So that was a big learning point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like kind of your biggest learning opportunities have come when you've taken risks or when you've been in a situation which is a bit of a risk. I always think when a graduate or when you're in your early career and there's lots of opportunities to move around, most logistics companies have several sites,
Yeah,
and it can feel like a big risk. I've just taken one moving
you have.
down to
Yeah,
Hemel.
yeah,
But actually it's when you learn the most. You're put in sometimes a bit of a uncomfortable or unknown environment, and suddenly you find that you're learning much more of a breadth of knowledge or experiences that you've never had before.
yeah,
Um,
100%, 100%. And for me, I'm an introvert. I struggle meeting people for the first time. That might shock people when I sometimes stand up in front of 1,500 people and talk. But it's the truth that I'm not comfortable meeting new people. And I remember making a conscious decision early in my career. I had a choice between doing a transport role or doing a warehouse role. And I remember chatting to my mentor, and we chatted it through, and I chose to go down the warehouse route because when you're managing a warehouse team, you're with them all the time that you're at work. Whereas when you're managing a transport team, a group of drivers might go out at some point in the day and then they all come back. And in between times, you've got lots of work to do, but you're not with them all the time. And I felt that for me to get over some of my inhibitions and learn to manage people, I was better off doing that in an environment where I had to manage them all the time as opposed to at either end of the day. So that was a conscious decision that I took to tackle that weakness of mine. And again, that was about taking a risk. To your point.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I found coming into the GIST grad scheme with no real management experience, going straight onto the shop floor and learning to manage a group of people who were incredibly diverse, who had been in the industry for much longer than me,
Yeah,
was a real learning curve. It was brilliant and it really set me off on a good foot. So I completely agree. It's interesting you say you're an introvert. I think in the industry, we look at successful people and imagine that they are quite extroverted, quite risk-taking, quite it's kind of a type of person. I like the color test, so I always imagine people as red, and you see that a lot, but I've come to realize it takes a lot of different colors of personalities to make up a good company and to balance each other out. Have you had experience with that,
yeah,
especially over your
100%.
career?
Yeah, 100%. I when I worked for Arla Foods, which is a large Danish cooperative, Lurpak butter is the brand that everyone would know. they actually pulled together a team, and I was one of 3 graduates. We'd come from different businesses, but we were all mid to late 20s, all quite bright, all sort of done engineering type degrees, so happy with maths. And they put the 3 of us together as a team to manage a distribution operation delivering milk direct to supermarkets. We were too similar. All 3 of us were happy to do the analysis. All 3 of us were happy to do the presentations and build the story. But none of us was, a seasoned operator who dealt with conflict, etc., etc. So the team failed, and we failed quite quickly because we weren't balanced and we weren't a blend. And I think one of the things I'd encourage anyone in any job to do is really make sure you understand yourself and your weaknesses, because to your point, you're absolutely right. It's about the breadth of the team and the blend of skills that you have within a team, and recognizing that if you're leading a team, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be the one that's the best at everything. In fact, invariably, you're not the one who's best at anything. And you have to embrace that and support other people and allow them to play their role. So yeah, fully agree with that. Teams are about a balance. There's no doubt about it. And one of the great things that I've seen in my career, and it's fantastic talking to a female. If I go back to my very, very first management meeting in 1995, that makes me feel old. But back in 1995, I was taken into a management meeting to develop me for my experience, come into this meeting and see what it's like. And I sat in a room with probably about 10 people, all male, all 55 and over. And that was the industry back then. And it's great seeing how the diversity of the industry has changed and evolved. It's got further to go. But it's really pleasing seeing how it has changed, and it's that balance of background, that mix of perspectives, of all those things that go into making us all unique. That broadening is super exciting, and it's great to see it's changed so much in my time in logistics. But yeah, it's really stark that I've interviewed for roles where there hasn't been a female application, let alone someone we've actually interviewed. So that diversity and diversification is superb. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, changing the wider perspective of what logistics looks like. Mm-hmm. So obviously Generation Logistics are doing a lot of that through their campaigns, but it's understanding kind of about the personality side. You don't have to fit in a box of what you think someone successful is going to look like in order to be successful in logistics. And I think that we're definitely understanding that more, and we're looking for other skills and attributes when we interview people. I've been involved in some of the graduate insight days, and you're not just looking for the person who's going to come in, take charge and run away with it. You're looking for such a mix of people. And I think changing that, and people outside the industry being able to look in and meet people and see that there is a lot of diversity, and that you as yourself can do well in this industry, is really important in order to attract people, because it is a lot about perception and the image that we have. So yeah, I think we're working on that. There is some way to go, but I imagine that it has changed a lot and really improved.
Yeah, enormously. Yeah, and it's such an exciting industry, because if you think about it, if you really like routine, there's routine. If you like to be creative, well, there's a whole host of problems that need solving. If you're particularly technical, you can get into fleet technology. You can get into how do we use technology to improve our environmental impact. How do you motivate and lead teams? How do you pull teams together? There's such a diverse spread of what you can do in logistics. It's great fun. I've loved it.
Absolutely. I feel like every time I meet somebody new at a conference, or just generally, even in our business, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that was a job. Oh,
Yeah,
that makes so much
yeah,
sense. That's so
yeah,
interesting. And there's so much more to it than trays in, trays out, and trucks on the road, that there is so much. And I mean, I saw it at my previous role. We did quite a few trials of electric vehicles. Obviously, we're quite established with electric rigids, but with Arctics and the longer journeys, it's really interesting to see the different types of technology that are being developed,
yeah.
and seeing kind of a glimpse into the future where our carbon footprint can be really reduced. Like, you've obviously been working for Chill Chain in your between years between Fowler Welch and
Yeah.
Gist. You had involvement with them. They're doing great things, and definitely around sustainability. How was that? Because that's a tech company, really, isn't it?
It is a tech company, yeah, and again, that was great fun, and one of the things that I thoroughly enjoyed about being in that business was it was a different culture for me. Um, so it was being a tech startup, a lot of people who were specialists in working in startups. There, the company strapline was everybody makes the tea, which is for me so evocative. You know, it's so illustrative in terms of everybody's equal. You know, it was a really nice strapline, and it's a great example of where technology is being brought to improve the way that logistics is organised and arranged. And yeah, it was a great business and great fun to be involved with a group of people who turned up every day wanting to solve problems. So yeah, it was good fun.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting. I mean, we both work with Ocado. That's one of Gist's customers, and their use of like technology in their warehouses is obviously much forward thinking. And there's so many different ways that technology can get involved in the industry, through planning and AI, using planning for the retailers. Obviously, they already use AI to look at purchasing and how much stock they'll need. Is there anywhere in particular that you think the industry is going to really go forward using this technology?
So telemetry is something that I've been a big fan of for many years. So we use Microlizer in our business, as you know, but other telemetry providers are out there. But I was probably one of the very first people to fully deploy telemetry across a whole business, which was when I led a business called Samworth Brothers Distribution back in 2005. And seeing the power of how you can use data to improve the performance and the environmental impact and the safety of drivers in terms of their driving styles. And that was super exciting, and I really enjoyed doing it at the time. And if you look at how that's evolved over the years and how that's continued to progress, it's super exciting. When you then look at how big data and analytics and AI can be applied to that technology, it's superb. Imagine if you've got a driver who's having a bad day and therefore their driving style has dropped. If you could actually make a positive intervention to understand why their driving style had changed, because it might be a factor that's got nothing to do with work and things like that, and the acceleration of technology and being able to use data to is just super exciting.
I like the link between technology and improving, obviously, the economy and the environment side of the driving, but also linking it to the people side, and how actually, without being too invasive, we can use it to help our people to
100%.
feel better
Yeah,
at work and to get the best out of them in a really empathetic and helpful way,
yeah,
rather than just through, bog standard performance reviews.
yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
that's
well,
really interesting. Yeah.
it's interesting for me as well. If I look back to the start of my career, you'd have very seldom hear people talk about leadership. People would have talked about management, and they would have talked about how you design an organization to manage things. They wouldn't have talked about leadership. And there's a real transition that again I've seen, and for me, I think leadership's moving more and more towards coaching and welfare. So how do you coach people? How do you make sure their welfare is right? How do you help people turn up and be the best person they can be in performing their role for your organization? And that's partly about leadership, but it's also about how you create that environment, how you nurture the individual. And each individual is different. Um, the challenge for us as leaders is how do you balance creating that environment in a way that's fair and consistent. We've got 7,000 people who work for us. You can't have 7,000 different ways of engaging with each individual, but what can you do to make the engagement with each individual as sort of right for each individual as you can within the context of how many people you've got to manage. And that's that's a challenge for us as leaders and as an industry. How do we attract people in? It's great fun. I fell into this 29 years ago, and I've had a great career, thoroughly enjoy it. I'm still in it. Many of the people who I started a graduate training with are still in it. And Claire Bottle, who's the chief exec of UPQA, the UK Warehousing Association, she and I were graduate trainees together. It's a great industry, great fun, lots of great people. But how do we get that message out there? That is one of the challenges. It's seen as this big industrial, tough industry. It's not. It's great. It's great fun.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, shout out to Claire, who's on Women in Logistics Forum. I'm going to their conference soon. But it's definitely true. I think we do have a skills gap coming up, and you just need to look around, especially on site, and you do see there are certain demographics which are much more represented in some roles. Yep. For example, drivers, obviously, we have a driver population who are nearing retirement. Brexit took away some of our drivers as well. And I think I'm actually really surprised when I do visit GIST sites, I see quite a few young, female, diverse drivers, and it is becoming, I think, more of a option for career choices. I think it is just about that advertising, the understanding, it's flexible working, it's understanding what actual benefits you can get from careers where, when you think of a truck driver in your head, it's not necessarily, an 18, 20-year-old woman, but actually it can work really well for people's lifestyles. It can be a really rewarding job. There's so much variety through the industry in terms of what you can do. And, you can go really far. You can learn a lot through that.
And I think it's also one of the things I like about the industry is, if I take the chap who succeeded me as chief exec at Fowler Welch, he didn't go to university. You don't have to go to university to do well in this industry. You don't have to be a graduate. And the apprentice schemes that are now being developed are fantastic. And again, there's so many opportunities for people to forge a career in different ways in logistics that I don't think other industries have. And yet it can be just as fulfilling.
Absolutely. I think it's been really interesting. I came in as a graduate from a music degree, so completely left field.
Case in point.
But it's a different perspective. And it's all those so-called soft skills, which are actually incredibly important and form the foundation of your leadership style, of your way of thinking. But you work in conjunction with people who might have started on the shop floor, who then go further to be a manager, to then go into planning or into resourcing. And they have so much experience you can tap into. And it's the two together that really work 100%. Really well. And you're learning from each other, which I think is really important.
And music, it's creative. We solve problems in our industry. It's one of the things we do. We have to solve problems that rock up every day, every time we try and do something, and something happens that makes it difficult, like a road closure or whatever it may be. And that creativity is a really important part of logistics. It's about problem solving, about pushing boundaries, and there you go. You're a case in point.
I am. I did an interview.
Do I ask you to sing a song at this point?
No, absolutely not. I did an article with one of our colleagues, Lee Costin, who did a fine arts degree, about the fact that creative backgrounds do actually work really well in logistics. So if anyone wants to find that, it was in Focus last year. But okay. So as my final question, what do you think is, if you had to sum it up in one, what do you think is the best piece of advice that you've been given that you wish you could go back and just tell yourself way earlier?
It's one that actually comes up, and so it's going to sound a little bit cliched, because I've seen others say this, but trust yourself. It's I think many people, and certainly I, have a fear of failure, and therefore people don't often take risks, and they're always quite safe. And I, if I look back at my career, there's been times when I've hesitated when I should have been bolder. And I think that'd be my advice to people: take a risk, trust yourself. Yeah, and especially if you're in an environment where you're working with people who you can say, look, I want to take a risk. Back to my point about choosing good bosses and working in a good environment, because I think it's easy to doubt yourself and easy to say all the reasons why you shouldn't try doing something rather than actually give it a go. So that'd be trust yourself.
It works well in an innovative industry as well.
Yeah, exactly. And do you know what? I'm a great believer that try something. If it doesn't work, stop and try something else. Yeah, life's simple. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure. And yes, I'm sure I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.